Summer of my discontent. The summer of my 12th year found me in an Upper Michigan Bible camp. For the previous 5 years or so, my mother, two of my sisters, and I had been attending a fundamentalist Christian church, although in the 1950s neither the adjective nor the meaning behind it were known to the general public. No different than most religious institutions, much of what was taught had to be taken on faith and interpretation, the latter being the purview of whatever slice of Christianity held your former. I remember running to the first aid station, which my mother, a registered nurse, managed, and pulling her aside for a quiet conference. Several of my new friends had been spouting religious doctrine that had been taught to us in class that morning as though it were unquestioned gospel, pun intended. I was quite upset by their casual acceptance of the information and thought my mom could help explain away shadows of doubt lingering around my mind's periphery. She tried, but I wasn't buying it as easily as she'd hoped. Finally, in exasperation, tinged with humor, she said, "Honey, you're never going to be religious. You question too much." 9 years later, with the death of my mother, I decided the same thing. She had died after years of backbreaking work and little happiness to show for it, and my relentless questions about how such a thing could happen to anyone, let alone my mother, fissured into a break with the church. If 3 words can possibly describe the inner need of an individual, mine would be, I must understand. I can't help it. I was born that way. My mind insists on understanding, not simply accepting. In recent years, I've learned to mesh the intellect and intuitive, paying both their due, but when I first started reading the Seth material, my skittish movement toward or away from it was up for grabs. Fortunately, Seth made sense on a hardcore physical level, as well as with the softer, less provable esoterica, so I stuck around. As I am of logic-oriented persuasion, the information that convinced me that if conscious creation can work at all, it is because of this. Our set concepts of consciousness, simultaneous time, and probabilities. No longer was I told simply to have faith that all would work out. I was told why, if I had faith, it would all work out. That information answers so many questions about the universal structure that allows and supports the creation of everything. Events, material items, bodies, our world, the environment, indeed all of physical reality, that it made it easier for me to give conscious creation a try. I love the term haphazard constructions. Seth uses it a couple of times in his books, and it captured my imagination. Paraphrased, he says much of what we see in the world is a result of beliefs gone haywire. Because we don't know we're creating it all, we don't do it with finesse. We blunder into the creation of events and then must face their results, and it ain't pretty at all times. Illness, accidents, poverty, victimization, aggression, loveless relationships, the list goes on. Haphazard constructions made manifest. So maybe it's time we drop currently accepted conventional thinking from the A-list, since it hasn't exactly transformed our world into one of brotherly love and abundance for all, and move on to unconventional ideas that just may do the trick. In Beyond the Winning Streak, I told of my search for answers, the ongoing doubts that assailed me at every turn, and the culmination of my conscious creation efforts after several years of trying. After I completed the book, I realized it was my version of Chapter 1 of Conscious Creation. My need to understand continues and, by its very nature, leads me into new challenges and further insights. This book is meant to be my version of Chapter 2 of Conscious Creation. Many others around the globe are writing their own chapters, if not on paper, certainly in their psyches, as they also grapple with the intricacies of consciously living in a reality constructed of thought. The responsibility for your life and your world is indeed yours. It has not been forced upon you by some outside agency. You form your own dreams and you form your own physical reality. The world is what you are. It is the physical materialization of the inner selves which have formed it. Seth, the Seth material, chapter 18. The 180-degree turn. Conscious creation is nothing more than learning to live in physical reality under the guidelines established for it. It's a fancy name for living naturally within the universal structure that supports all creation, conscious or otherwise. The whole purpose of conscious creation is to break the bonds of past limiting beliefs about what is and what is not possible in our lives and reach for the stars with new knowledge under our belts. It is, in essence, becoming adept at manipulating within our reality to manifest lives of choice. Defining conscious creation isn't that difficult. Understanding its subtleties is more complex. To consciously create what we want out of life takes a complete reorientation of thinking, a 180-degree revolution away from what we've been taught is real. Lo, these many years. We're so used to believing that events happen outside ourselves, formed by luck, fate, and other people, that we never question the validity of the belief. It becomes an assumption and a very powerful limiting one. The most exhilarating gift we can give ourselves is the knowledge that we are lowercase gods with complete creative control over our lives. From this point of understanding, we can then build a platform of thought which allows us to radically change our circumstances. When we decide to take credit for the events we experience, we bump against the pattern thinking of the masses. Their beliefs in individual powerlessness hit us every time we read a newspaper, watch television, listen to conversations. If you want to reinforce the idea you're a victim of circumstances, no problem. The vehicles are endless and constant in today's society, including what's found in much metaphysical material. So most of what we'll be doing for the rest of this book is to help break the hypnotic focus on what we've been conditioned to accept and come into our own through a reorientation of thinking. Learning to tell truth from snake oil. After reading Beyond the Winning Streak, a man called to tell me he was so excited by the possibilities of conscious creation that he had decided to double the size of his office in preparation for the inflow of business he was sure would occur. I grew uneasy listening to him as it became apparent that he'd only given the structure behind conscious creation a cursory nod of the head. I felt he was flying by the seat of the superficial, running with the hope that all would work out to match his desire, just because he'd read it in a book. In other words, he'd not changed his thoughts in any significant way that would allow for success. He'd simply chosen one idea of the many that comprise the concept of conscious creation and called it his savior. 4 months later, he closed down his additional space due to lack of business, somewhat sick at heart and definitely doubting the validity of consciously creating his reality. Another person told me of losing his home to bankruptcy and believing the universe had set the stage for such a wallop in order to tell him it was time to release his attachment to it. A woman friend suggested that a car accident in which he was injured was put into place by the universe so that she would learn to slow down and take life easier. I heard another woman tell a group of friends that she never wears the color red because of the negative effect it has on other people's aura. According to a booth exhibitor I met at a metaphysical trade show, the reason some people were challenging the veracity of the products he was selling was because of karma. Another exhibitor at the same show was promoting the idea that he could teach people to tap into the unified field, and then all their beliefs would automatically change because they would become one with the field. The New Age is adrift in misunderstandings. Sure, new ideas have blown the ceiling of mainstream thought. Yes, pioneering concepts have ceded ground long fallow. But like the first frontier towns of the Old West, there's no understanding of basic organization, no obvious order, no apparent way to tell truth from snake oil. Never mind that we're having one heck of a good time exploring all the boisterous possibilities. That's not the issue. The issue is, are we changing? Do our personal lives reflect the material items and feelings we wish to experience? Does our global life reflect the calmness and attunement we've been told is possible? Have we learned the true nature of this physical reality, and are we becoming skilled at working within it to make events of choice happen? If not, the villain isn't necessarily whimsy. Maybe it's lack of understanding. The kernels of truth have been popped with common corn and tumbled into a bowl of new thought. But to our inexperienced eye, they all look alike. So we test one here, one there, intrigued with the flavor, but nonetheless still stuck in the old job, the lack of money, the failing body, the loveless relationship. The new spirituality of the last several decades offers an anchor in our sometimes turbulent lives, a checkpoint for what we call our spiritual growth. We feel we're finally getting the hang of living in this reality, finding our purpose and life's meaning, but too often our developing views windsurf the edges of knowledge about our reality, when what we need to do is to dip into the depths in order to understand what causes creation and our role in the process, because what we create becomes our private lives, our societies, and our civilization. Bumper sticker stuck. You create your own reality. Seth said it for the first time in 1964. That phrase, destined to launch what's come to be called the New Age, went on to become one of the most popular one-liners of the whole movement, repeated zillions of times by millions of people. But understood? That's another issue. It reminds me of a conversation I once had that went something like this. But Linda, you can't tell people that they create their realities. I mean, after all, look at their lives, for heaven's sake. Even if they believe it, what happens? They feel guilt or blame for what they've created. No, it will never work. And this from a man who had been around metaphysics for over 20 years and made quite a name for himself in the process. But it does point out a major issue. If this guy didn't recognize the liberating, life-changing power behind the words, "You create your own reality," why not? He'd been exposed to hundreds of acclaimed forward thinkers. He'd mingled with them professionally and personally. He'd written books about them. The problem seemed to be, at least from my perspective, after having read many of the ideas espoused by these people, that they still believe in one reality and one self that is unfolded through linear time, with the main purpose of life being to grow spiritually. And those beliefs automatically place boundaries on the range and breadth of their thinking. They may talk a bigger picture, but their new ideas are colored by what their senses and historical thought systems suggest is real. Generally speaking, what many metaphysical people believe is 1. We create our own reality sometimes. 2. There is an orderly past, present, and future with one moment and 1 year flowing into the next. 3. We are explicitly in physical existence to become more spiritual. 4. Sure, the universe is here to support, and it also is here to teach us lessons, whether we like them or not. 5. We can be impacted by the energy and thoughts of others. According to Seth, 1. We create our own reality without exception. 2. Time is simultaneous, with the past, present, and future active, accessible, and changeable in this very moment. 3. We already are spiritual beings here in physical reality for deeper reason and purposes. 4. The universe is here to support, and the lessons we face are placed in time by each of us for our individual reasons. 5. We have complete creative control over what we experience, and that means we cannot be impacted by another in any way unless we allow it. The difference in these two sets of assumptions spells the difference between whether or not we reach individual freedom and world peace. The first set carries us beyond mainstream thinking, but not far enough to make a sustained impact. Although draped in new thought, it still too closely parallels the myth of a personified exterior controller and a hapless individual adrift in a universe run by luck and happenstance to support dramatic change. When we force completely new views of reality into that old mold, we lose the power of the message. As long as we believe we are at the mercy of fate, the universe, a linear time, or other people, for any reason whatsoever, we will never shed our beliefs in vulnerability and victimization, and so will continue to experience them. It can be no other way in a reality where what we believe is made manifest. So, let's start our search for answers and change by first studying the construct of the universe in general and physical reality in particular. Or, better said, since tomes could be written about both subjects, let's select those bits of information for discussion that help us craft a new set of lenses through which to view life, and by default, teach us about conscious creation. All that is. The beginning, to use an accepted if distorted term, was a condition where all that is not fulfilled. It existed in a state of conscious being as a psychic pyramid gestalt, but without the means to express itself. It was loaded with probabilities and possibilities desiring actualization, but ways to produce them were not apparent. All that is saw an infinity of probable conscious individuals and understood all possible developments around each. And it was consumed with a desire to create both the individuals and their infinite probabilities. This overwhelming need to create and the expectation that a way would be found culminated in a magnificent flash of creation as psychic energy from all that is burst forth into actualization. In so doing, all that is gave birth to individualized consciousness. The connection between each of us as individualized consciousness and our Creator can never be severed. As a literal part of all that is, a portion of all that is that knows itself as us, we retain memory of its great creativity and desire, and they become ours. We draw upon its overall energy constantly, since our existence depends on it, and as our source, it is there when we need help. Even the most minute particle of all that is carries the innate knowledge of the whole. So while we are very much individual, our individuality can better be described as a distinct portion of all that is made to look separate. From all that is springs all worlds, all realities, all selves. It is a living, loving, expanding energy gestalt of consciousness that thinks itself into shapes, events, and things. Everything within our universe, space, time, matter, and forces, emerges and is molded from this energy of consciousness. Everything we see in our reality is consciousness allowing itself to be made physical for its own expression. So it goes without saying that dead matter is a non sequitur. It also goes without saying that consciousness cannot die. It can and does change states, but it can't be annihilated. Desire and expectation are the basis for any of all that is created structures. Hence, they are the overriding impetuses that direct and shape our lives, since we share characteristics with it by nature of our heritage. Desire and expectation lead us to create further structures which reflect the wholeness of all that is, and the cycle of creativity and the expansion of all that is continues, partially through us. Consciousness units. All that is creates consciousness. Consciousness is all that is. The implications of those two statements would change the face of civilization if understood and accepted. What they suggest is that everything we see and experience is built of consciousness, and everything we see and experience is a part of all that is. All realities, worlds, events, matter, and creatures are extensions of all that is, literally formed from consciousness by it. Nothing appears anywhere in the universe without the building blocks of consciousness behind its creation and within its structure. But how? Does God wave a cosmic wand and voila, another event, another material object is created? Or is there, dare we say, logic associated with manifestation? According to Seth, that is the case. That we don't understand it is our problem. The mechanics, if you will, have always been in place, and we've used them whether we knew it or not. It seems that consciousness is composed of individual mental units of consciousness, CUs. Held within each CU is the knowledge of the universe and the history and the pattern of all that is. These units are non-physical energy that is aware of itself, and each CU has the built-in ability to organize, expand, and develop along any lines it chooses. It is charged with a propensity toward expression and a great desire to fulfill itself through creativity. According to Seth, CUs never become physical particles themselves, but all physical matter arises from them. Now, an interesting thing about these CUs. They exist outside physical time and space. And because they are not formed under the rules of time and space or three-dimensional reality and are everywhere concurrently, they are free to be clairvoyant and precognitive. Not only that, their awareness of all psychic organizations of which they are a part allows them to pass great amounts of information back and forth, eschewing time and space boundaries. These consciousness units are endowed with unpredictability, which is extremely important because anything less would ultimately result in stagnation. This unpredictability, by its very nature, supports infinite probabilities and patterns. Consciousness, in order to create and develop, has to have the ultimate freedom to be what it chooses when it chooses. CUs form themselves into groupings and systems that they themselves initiate, becoming their own camouflage or disguise. From these groupings and systems come everything from realities to rocks, offering the participating CUs a platform for experience, the whole point of their being. And our being is a direct result of their being. Seth says, CUs form what we think of as the mind, and the brain and the body follow. The mind is resident throughout the body and beyond, not just in the brain, Seth says. But CUs don't just form us, they permeate us while still residing outside of time and space. And that's why, because of a CU's propensity to know everything of which it is a part, every cell in our body knows instantly what is happening with its counterparts, and every mind is in constant touch with all others. It's the communication system of the CUs that makes our reality run smoothly.